Hello, hello. Welcome back to People Junkie, a podcast about people and their stories, as everyone has one. And maybe you could connect with someone you never thought you would. If you've been following the podcast, we appreciate it. And if you're new, thanks for joining. Now, today's word of the day is cinephile. It's defined as a person who is fond of motion pictures. And my guest today has taken cinephile to a whole new level. He is the founder and executive director of the Frida Cinema, a nonprofit, community-based, mission-driven art house cinema, which has served Orange County since 2014. He's also been a lifelong film enthusiast with a particular affinity for horror, cult, and camp cinema. He is also a passionate advocate for arts education and currently serves on the board of directors for Arts Orange County. Before he had the Frida Cinema, he was the founder and director of the Long Beach Cinematheque, as well as the cult cinema website, mondocelluloid.com. Without further ado, I bring you Logan Crow. Hi, Logan. How's it going?
Hey, pretty well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks so
Excellent.
much for taking the time to join us here on People Junkie. I had to get you on. You know, we are celebrating, I like to say Latino or Latina Heritage Month. Some people like to say Latinx or Hispanic. So I really appreciate you joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
You
For
know,
sure.
you're welcome. Your name is very interesting, Logan Crow. Can you talk
Mhm.
about how you got that name and where it comes from?
Yeah, for sure. So technically, it's Irish. So my father is from Ecuador. My mother is from Nicaragua, but my father's I think great grandfather immigrated from Michigan by way of Ireland into Ecuador. And married an Ecuadorian woman. And so our last name was actually Crow with an E at the end. And then at some point, one line dropped the E, the other one didn't. So I have some cousins with the E, some without. And then Logan was, I think, my great uncle's name, who then my father is Logan, and then he passed it down to me. So I'm Logan Crow Jr. But that's where that comes from. So my mom lost that argument. I came this close, from what I understand, to being Jose Luis.
Oh,
But dad wanted a junior. So Jose Luis Crow would have been interesting, but yeah,
I mean, Logan Crow is very interesting. A lot of people,
thanks.
because yeah, a lot of people look at me and they're like, oh, you're too light to be Mexican. And do you ever get that where people look at you, they're like, oh, but your last name's Crow and you look too light to be Latino?
You know what? Fortunately, not in those words. I do. My dad, and it's funny because my mother, you could tell down the block, she's darker skin, she came out here when she was 24. So she's still very seeped in her culture. Dad came out when he was 7 to America, doesn't have an accent, learned, but we all speak Spanish fluently. So my dad and I get similar reactions when we suddenly snap into Spanish, which is
Mm-hmm.
a surprise, or wow, you speak it really well. Where'd you learn it? And I tell people, well, I was speaking it before I was speaking English, but no, I haven't gotten the you're too light skinned. I hear things like that all the time. And it's just like, oh my God. But no, I've yet to have that sort of, expressed to me so
Wow.
much as a, hey, kind of a surprise.
Yeah, I get that when,
Yeah.
especially you're in an elevator and then you hear people speaking Spanish and then they
Mhm.
say something about you and then you start busting out, ¿Sabes qué? Hablo español también. They're like, whoa, okay,
Right.
sorry. All right. Now it's like I'm going to give you daps because, you speak Spanish and you're probably Latina.
What I got a lot of growing up when I was little and innocently in its own way from other little kids was, I didn't know you were Mexican. And that always gave me an opportunity to sort of provide some education and be like, oh no, there's plenty of other countries, and Nicaragua and Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as things like you don't look blank, no, I haven't. I've been lucky enough to not hear that because I wouldn't know how to respond to that. Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely had practice. Well, definitely getting
right.
back to you, you know, what made you decide one day, I think I want to own a independent cinema house because you are in charge of the Frida Cinema House in Orange County. I was going to say Long Beach because you were actually, that's where we met. You
Correct.
were the founder of the Long Beach Cinematheque here in Long Beach. We'll definitely talk about that a little later, but what made you decide to take on this huge venture?
it was a trajectory. It's a weird thing. I've always loved film as an art form. It's always been the art form that always spoke to me the most. And I'm an arts lover and arts patron in general. I consider myself to be a creative person. But film and really close second to that, music, were always the art forms that spoke to me, just across all levels. And when you're little, I think when I was little, I just assumed that meant that I wanted to become a filmmaker. But as I sort of learned more about film and studied and went to school and went in and out of art houses and all the above, I realized that really my love of film was about the art form and the discussion of the art form and how it serves to transport people and enrich people and educate people and shock people and make people feel alive, for the lack of a better word. And so sharing films became the thing that sort of I was just doing since high school on. If I saw something that was under the radar, I had to show all my friends, I had to show my family, I had to make sure that the film was talked about, and I'd get behind filmmakers and things like that. And so interestingly, I look at what I do at the Frida as a career example of something I was doing in high school, which is sharing films, and then having discussions about the impact of the film or the cultural relevance of the film or what was going on at the time, or how a filmmaker's oeuvre of films tie in together, what they say about the artist or the time the film was made. Just, I look at films the way other people may look at graphic art or painters or what have you, classical music. There are stories within the piece of art itself, as well as the story that the piece of art is telling. So I know that's a convoluted answer, but it was just kind of always the direction I was going in, without really realizing as a young person that is the career that I want. I dreamed of having a movie theater without really knowing what that meant.
Yeah.
It's just, I want to have a movie theater, and the more I volunteered at art houses and spent time at art houses, the more I'm like, no, I think this really is what I want to do for a living, not as a pipe dream, but as a career goal.
And how were you able to take that career path? Because it's a very unusual career path.
Yeah. It was a lot. I consider myself really blessed. I mean, I made a lot of noise along the way. I've never held back sort of what my visions and ideas are, but I do consider myself very blessed and lucky. But essentially, it started with volunteerism. I'm a huge advocate for volunteerism. Whenever I'm given an opportunity to talk to a class or talk to students, I always tell them, if you're not sure what you want to do, or you think but you're not sure, think of things you're passionate about and volunteer. If you love animals, volunteer to shelter. Just volunteer, because what happened to me was I was volunteering at the American Cinematheque in Hollywood. They run the Egyptian Theater and the Era Theater in Santa Monica. And through that process of just wanting to be there, basically to be with other people who love movies and watch movies, because that's what you got to do when you volunteered there, I learned about the business of running an art house. I learned about the nonprofit side of running an art house and how a theater could be a nonprofit and what mission driven means and curating films. And every new thing I learned was exciting and felt like this is what I want to do. So from volunteering, that led to the formation of a website that was initially founded to support art house programming, but then branched out into its own programming website, which was Mondo Celluloid. That led to me programming late films at the Art Theater in Long Beach, which then led to the formation of a nonprofit, which was the Long Beach Cinematheque, for about 4.5 years, which led me to get involved with tying in film with education and working with different community groups, creating events like Long Beach Zombie Walk, finding ways to sort of take film outside of the theater and into sort of real life. Which then led to the Frida Cinema in the most interesting way. And again, it was just sort of a path that I was on without really knowing I was on it, even though I was doing exactly what I felt I was supposed to be doing at the time, if that makes sense.
No, it actually does. One of my friends, I had him on, his name is Armando Hart, and he says what you do in
Mhm.
your present is what is for your future. So what you were doing in that present actually led you to your future.
I believe it, and I remember Armando, and if he said it, it's true. Yes,
Yeah, he's such an amazing person.
very soulful. Yeah,
You know
for
what?
sure.
I just want to talk about the zombie walk because you definitely, I did your introduction and you do have an affinity for horror and the
Mhm.
cults, you know, and for camp cinema. What made you decide and how did you come up with, hey, you know what? Let's take cinema and let's take it to the streets with the zombie walk.
I'm a big proponent for whimsy. I'm a big kid at heart in a lot of ways, and I recognize that adults in general are, and I think some of us hold that back, but it's there to be found. And I get excited when I feel like things are becoming organic and people are sort of creating something out of something else. And so with Zombie Walk, it started May of 2009. Literally, we had a Night of the Living Dead screening at the Art, and I thought, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be fun to do a little zombie walk? So we put the word out. We had about 100 people, 150 people. They just went from Fourth and Junipero to Fourth and Cherry, and then we all watched
Mhm.
Night of the Living Dead. And then immediately there was like, are you going to do it again in October for Halloween?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, let's. So we did another one that October. And then now I have a year to 2010. And we were like, should we make this an annual thing? But because we spent, a few months on it for 2010, by the time it was coming around, it was clear that it was becoming something big.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 3,000 people. And it was a block long. Again, we all met at the coffee house in front of the Portfolio Coffee House, went down to the art theater. And I remember when the audience went into the movie theater, the owner of the theater was outside. His name was Jan. And I remember very specifically the line he said. He says, this didn't make a dent. And he's like, the theater's full already. And it doesn't look like it made a dent to the people on the street. It looked
Yeah.
exactly the same. It was just, I think the art seats 380. So it's 380 people walked in and there were still over 2,000 people on the street. So then that inspired a thought, which is, okay, now they're here. Now what? So fortunately, people sort of brought their own ideas to it, and they brought in anti-zombie truck, and people were in groups, and then they like a pseudo pride zombie pride march started. People started to get really, really creative. There was
I remember.
a choreographer that did a dance, and so basically I just started to talk to all these people, and I'm like, okay, I have a vision, which is for next year. Here's the thought. And Long Beach has an incredible LGBT pride event and parade.
Oh yeah.
And so I said, what if, as a theme, as an idea, zombies have taken over the world and they want to throw an event to celebrate zombie-ness? What would that look like? So zombie food, zombie bands, zombie movies, everything must be zombie. Everything must celebrate the zombie aesthetic. And what kind of groups might want to get involved and who might want to get creative with it? And should we bring in schools? And so it just developed from there. And then Zombie Walk 4 was the huge one where I think 12,000 people descended. We took over Pine Avenue. It was just incredible. And that was basically, me reaching out to different groups and saying, what could you do with this? What do you want to do with this?
Mm-hmm.
Renaissance High School of the Arts. Do you guys want to do skits? Just inviting different groups to get involved. Long Beach Post, that became an incredible partner. They had a cover story with a giant bloody handprint and
Yeah, I
put out
remember
an
that.
entire edition as if Long Beach had been taken over by zombies. Sandra Wolf, who was a journalist, was writing these incredible zombie pieces. I mean, the whole thing just took over the city. And it was play. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. It was a free event, initially intended to promote what we were doing at the art theater, but I just felt it become something of its own. And I just wanted to let it and sort of chase alongside it and feed it along the way. And as
Yeah.
people were throwing in their own ideas into it,
Well, I just want
And
to thank you for that, because my
thanks.
goddaughter, she was, I mean, just like most people, were into The Walking Dead. And I actually took her to one of the zombie walks, and it was in downtown, and we got all dressed up, and she was like, "Oh my God, Nina, I'm so happy. This is so amazing." And we still have the pictures. And we don't see anything like that anymore in Long Beach, and we miss you,
Oh
and we
gosh.
miss the zombie.
I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, it was fun. And to me, it's funny when, one of the things that I'm most proud of, and that I feel is like a legacy, is that there is a little boy running around somewhere. His name is Declan, whose parents met at Zombie Walk, got married, and had a child. And so I can forever, it's like that It's a Wonderful Life moment of like, there's a life that exists because of something I came up with, and who's going to have, and affect his own lives, and grow up and don't do who knows what, that to me
Wow.
is still the thing that every once in a while I just sort of pinch myself and say, that's the one that I know of. I mean, so that's incredible to me, but yeah,
So
that was
you
fun. That
you
was a
help
lot of fun.
create you help create zombie babies, basically.
Yes, I helped create zombie babies. And for a while, you'd see as he was growing up, they'd like zombie him up in photos and stuff. But
Oh,
yeah,
that
no,
is awesome.
yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That's a great story. So going from, Long Beach Cinematheque and the zombie walk and stuff like that, you had to pivot and you had to turn and go to Santa Ana. Why was one of the reasons?
So what it came down to was that I really was finding that this is what I wanted to do. And Long Beach Cinematheque was never tied, it was never a venue. It was a nonprofit that's considered a
Mhm,
four-waller
mhm,
nonprofit, meaning that we would rent the facilities that we would do events in, and then the event would be over and we'd go home until the next event.
mhm,
And what was starting to happen was that there was, why don't you guys play this at your theater? Or we would support your theater, but we would love to see more of this. Or how do we support, how do we get, and I would consistently say, we don't have a theater. We're not
mhm.
this place or that place. We started to do the outdoor cemetery screenings that were great. But always sort of like leaning on what venues would be available, and all of it. And so it got to a point, and it was one of those really interesting things where at about 4.5 years, we were coming up on our 5th anniversary. And, this is one of those stranger than fiction things, but I don't mind. I love sharing it. I was at a point where I was starting to have internal monologues with myself, pray, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
I am starting to feel like if we don't identify a space of our own, I'm spinning my wheels. The natural progression right now would be to open up a space, and there is no space to open. And you would have dialogues here and there with different spaces, but it just wasn't going to happen in Long Beach. And it was literally right around that time that this email showed up in my inbox. Totally randomly, from someone I'd never met, who is the landlord of what would become the Frida. Hey, I own this building. It's been a second run theater for a while. The tenants are moving out. We're trying to figure out what to do with it. There's a lot of dialogue about, some people want to turn it into this, some people want to turn it into that, a parking lot, a nightclub. I would like to see it stay a theater, but there's challenge. Anyway, long story short, we see what you're doing in Long Beach. Would you be interested in having lunch and talking about these things? So I'm like, absolutely.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I went to have lunch with them, and I talked about, these are the challenges that are happening right now in the industry with digital conversion and everything else. That theater specifically, there was the AMC 30 developed not too, like couple miles away, and the Main Place Mall opened up a sixplex. So it was, losing business to these things. And what I, said was, Orange County doesn't have an art house. It does not have a independent, curated from within, looking at diverse programming, looking at partnerships with schools and different organizations, and basically working like a museum would, but with film instead of graphic art.
Mhm.
That would be your best bet, or find a billionaire who isn't challenged by any of these. No, honestly, like that's it. That's the only two models that will work right now.
You said stranger than fiction, right?
Yeah, with a 2-screen independent theater, you either bring in a nonprofit that's doing mission-based work and that is easily identified as different from what your normal movie theater would be, or the normal movie theaters will eat it up, or bring in someone who's not challenged by these challenges and can do whatever he wants. There's an amazing theater right outside of Chicago called the Hollywood that's incredible, that basically is owned by a very, very, very wealthy film lover who gets to do whatever he wants. And the programming is incredible, and it's decked up, but that's the only way that place would have run. So long story short, he took me to see the theater, and I walked in and had just this moment where I saw that it was 2 auditoriums. I saw a lobby that I visualized as an art gallery. I was like, oh my God, this theater could be doing first run art house films, and this theater could be doing repertory and yada, yada. And he took a huge chance because he's like, well, what do you think about running this space? And I was very transparent. I said, it's a dream. It would be a dream come true. But, having been to the art house convergence and knowing people who run cinemas, that conversation generally goes like this: let's start a theater. Cool. We need to spend the next 5 years raising to, $500,000-$600,000. And then we don't have money. We don't have, and we is me, I don't have money. Yeah. But what would you do with a space like this? And, I probably had my hand flailing. I just drafted it all out without study, just like boom, 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 and this kind of thing. And I would find it, and they gave us a huge, huge, huge shot. And, I hate sounding haughty, but I mean, it worked, and here we are, and it's been 8 years, and, I'm incredibly proud of it. It was tough to leave Long Beach. There was a lot of talk amongst the board of, it was kind of split. Obviously everyone was very supportive. I love my board, but there was a lot of, this isn't going to work in Orange County. And I've always been a firm believer. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in Smallsville, Kentucky. There are people who are hungry for art. There are people who are hungry for culture, for community, for engagement. And trust me, and also, and I'm like, and do you not know Santa Ana? I keep saying that. I'm like talking about Santa Ana in context of talking about Orange County is like talking about Austin in context of talking about Texas.
Yes.
Those are two conversations.
Yes, absolutely. And I hear you.
Yeah. And I'm like, Santa Ana has got an incredible art scene, and, and that's arts patrons, artists, both, and that togetherness and community in those communities has always been very evident and strong. I absolutely think this model would work. And I don't believe that we're going in competition with anything, because there is no art house in the entire county of Orange.
No.
And if we were going to open an art house in Orange, that is the place to be, and that's exactly the place to go. And so the rest is history. We kept the cemetery screenings going in Long Beach while we ran the theater, and we would have continued to, but the cemetery, obviously they closed and went back to the city. And then we've gone back and checked in, but it's still not something, I guess, that's ready to be done, but we're ready whenever you are, Robert, to go back to the cemetery.
I don't know if our mayor will be around for that.
Okay. And I think Gerardo came and went. So I don't know, Parks and Recs, whoever you are now.
No, what? Oh God, I apologize. Go ahead.
I mean, because that was a process too. I mean, gosh, what was the name of that councilman? James Johnson. James Johnson was the one that helped get me to. Then Mike Miner from Sunnyside, just a hero. Yeah. It took steps to get there, but it's a whole other thing now. So, but those were great. We had weddings there. I'd love to go back, but anyway. So,
so now you have this opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And what made you decide to name it the Frida?
Oh, so that came, I mean, it's named after Frida Kahlo, who, I not only admire as an artist, but there was a very specific element to that, which was, we were meeting, and it was an arduous task of coming up with a name to the place. We were going to be Casa for a while, which is Cinematheque at Santa Ana. But then okay. Cinematheque was always being butchered left and right as a spelling, and it's hard to pronounce. And I'm like, and it doesn't really communicate anything to people who don't know what a Cinematheque is. And
correct.
Although ironically, Frida doesn't necessarily say film either, but ultimately I wanted to name the place after a hero. And I was stuck on filmmakers, and references to filmmakers and whatnot. But then conversations started coming up about the challenges and how challenging it was going to be. And my mind sort of pivoted to trying to find a name that was a touchstone that we could look to when things got challenging. Who are artists who persevered, who did things their way, who were iconoclastic, who had a singularity of vision and communication that was unwavering, and who faced every conceivable challenge dead on and kept creating. And to know half of Frida Kahlo's story is to know that she had hardships hurled at her, the likes of which would stop many people in their tracks, that would give in to despair and stop moving forward. And she absolutely refused to, and kept creating. A lot of people don't know, she was in a full body cast for a while, creating on her back, and
exactly. Yeah, she was very transcendent as well. She transcended cultures, languages, because art is visual, right? So you could interpret it any which way. You don't have to know a language in order to understand it.
Absolutely. And then ultimately for me, she's a surrealist. And for me, I have a real affinity towards surreal and avant-garde art.
I do too.
Which is part of where the horror comes in. Horror in and of itself, I consider surrealist cinema. And so, maybe populist or pop surrealist cinema, or whatever you want to call it. But, someone running around with knives on his hand in your dreams, that's as Buñuel as it gets, but with a body count,
That's Freddy Krueger, by the way.
So ultimately then, to looking at Santa Ana's, incredible Mexican community, it felt like an acknowledgement of my neighbors as well. So it just was like an obvious, as soon as it was my sister Giselle who, in throwing, she's like, you're mentioning hardships, Frida Kahlo. And as soon as I heard Frida, it was like, well, she's not film, but that's it. Like, we've been focused too hard on film. That's it. And then there was like, but Frida Kahlo wasn't a filmmaker. I'm like, that's it. That's who I want. That's who I want to look to. Every time we think we are at a crossroads we cannot cross.
Wow.
And that's the rest of this. Yeah. So Frida. And then our logo is Frida Kahlo holding a Super 8 camera.
Yeah. That's actually one of my favorite logos, because you go from art to cinema. You're like, how, what, that makes sense. It melds, right?
Yeah, it's an art form. And that goes back to, I remember at some point I wrote a grant to curate a film festival. And the notes came back for clarification because they wanted to know how curating a film festival meshed up with their guidelines. One of the guidelines they had was curating a gallery show. So I went back, and what I said is, it will help for you to consider that curators at art galleries, what they do is they select art and they hang them on the wall, and then they take them down and hang some new art on the walls too. And I said, I also select art to hang on the wall. My art moves and makes noise for 2 hours. And then I take it down and put another artist's art up. And
that's smart.
It worked. So and it's literally how I feel. And so that led to sort of a personal mission to advocate for understanding and appreciating that cinema is an art form. I think that the Hollywood system makes that tough sometimes. They look at cinema as this populist thing. You go, you throw your money down, you eat your popcorn, and you watch Terminator 17. And it's like, or I'm not going to knock Transformer 17. I can knock Transformers all day. I have reverence for the Terminator films.
You better.
But, thank you. Right. But it's true. I mean, cinema is an art form, and for me, it's, I look back at high school, if I may. Like, I went to my high school pre-MySpace, pre-Facebook, all that stuff.
Pre-social media.
All of it, yeah. And the way that artists and people that were into art and that were more interested in getting to know people through art, basically their MySpace was the bands and the filmmakers they put in whiteout at the bottom of their shoe. that they scrawled on their peaches, the posters in their locker, and the stickers on their
Mm-hmm.
car. That's what you did. And when I look back at high school, that's for the first time that I had like an immediate family of friends that all like really understood each other and spoke the same language.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't all film lovers. There was, looking back at my high school, music people, a poet, film lovers, band people, goths who in and of, that make art of themselves, basically, and but we all spoke a common language, which was creativity, art, and I think that film and television, Twin Peaks, I remember, was huge for us in high school. I mean, these all are a culture, and so no, I definitely advocate for that.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because you have such a different story and people might be very interested in, maybe one day I may want to do that, because it is a bit old school, right? We're in 2021. You have all these streaming like Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and the list goes on and on. So what makes the Frida different? Why should people get in their cars, drive to the Frida in Orange County? And if you're going to visit from out of state or out of the country, I highly suggest it. But why? When they could just sit at home and eat the popcorn and be in their bed, basically.
I look at it this way. I mean, there's a few different reasons, but when I was, I think 19 or 20, I got to go to Paris for my first and only time. And I was so excited to go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa for some reason. In retrospect, I don't know why. It's the Mona Lisa. It's the Mona Lisa. I mean, it's kind of a big deal, but I still don't, there's a song about that. But anyway, I still don't get what but I was excited to see her. And, and I saw her, and you have to stand way back here, and she's behind a pane of glass, and she's tiny because you're so far away. But I got to see the Mona Lisa. But it occurred to me later that, I could pick up a coffee table book at Barnes and Nobles and see a version of her that's even larger and right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about seeing her there? And I think that there is something about seeing movies in a movie theater. Especially, we do a lot of classics, tons of revival films and classics and film series. And when I introduce, I always ask two questions. I say, who has never seen this film before? Show of hands. And then, who has seen this movie a million times, but never in a movie theater? Mm-hmm. And those two different audiences are just as important to me. I am as excited to show, I'll use Blue Velvet to people who've never experienced it and know, oh my God, they're going to get to have the experience that people had in '86, which is to sit down, not know what they're going into. Maybe they know a little bit, but, and see it big and wide and hear people around them reacting and ride that shared visceral energy with them. And people who have seen it, but never got to see it in the theater will get to see it, like really experience it cinematically. The Shining is a movie that we play at least once a year. And we always get feedback from people saying, I really thought that I'd seen and loved that movie. I don't think that was incredible. Thank you so much. There were things I noticed that I never noticed before. There were feelings I had that I never had before. How is it that after seeing this movie a million times, I was so terrified last night to experience on the big screen, and it's because it's akin to watching a concert, video throwing on YouTube right now and watching some band play versus seeing them live.
That's a great analogy right there. Right there, I feel will resonate with people.
It's the same thing. It's you've got it on your screen. They're right there. They may have better acoustics. There's no one in front of you blocking you. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me. And that is one of those things, is that we appreciate, that we understand that people appreciate that experience. And we advocate for people who may not know that if you love movies and if you love a particular film, you may want to treat yourself to this, because there is nothing like watching a movie on the big screen. It's very important to me that the Frida be a safe space. So I always look at it, I always say, I want to be the Cheers of movie theaters where everybody knows your name, So
I love it.
Yeah. So thank you. So, we work hard to let people know that they're welcome, that we know that they're there because they are excited to take in a piece of art, and we support their choice basically to take in this piece of art and to do it there at the Frida and to do it on the big screen. People have options. Like they say, we know you had a choice in airlines and we appreciate you flying with ours, but it's true. I mean, it's, and it's a place that cares. And we really care about the art form. We care about its impact. We care about how films can serve as a catalyst for awareness of something maybe that you weren't aware of, a world issue or a culture or something amazing somebody's doing in another part of the world that's changing lives, if it's a documentary or biopic, that might serve to inspire you, whether that's to personally follow down that line or to start doing the thing that you've been thinking about doing, or to make a film, like, wow, that seemed like that was really easy to do. Like, I want to make a film. I mean, nothing inspires filmmakers like other films.
Exactly. But you know what, being a filmmaker myself, nothing is easy. When it looks smooth, it's because you put in all the hard work. And that's why like people are like, oh, I've heard it before. Oh, I could do that. That's easy. Okay. Really okay. No, but getting back to the Frida, you were just talking a little bit about what type of films you have there. What other events do you have? Because I remember specifically, especially this is years back, but it was one of my favorite films, Do the Right Thing. And you had a special screening, and can you talk about who was there?
Oh, that was incredible. That was Roger Guenveur Smith, who came down. He played Smiley in Do the Right Thing, who is the character who stutters or stammers. I'm not sure which is correct to say. And who is both. And who is the last face you see in the film, I think, if memory serves. And certainly not the first. That'd be Rosie Perez doing that incredible say best, one of, if not the best opening title sequence ever. And that was a huge deal. It's really interesting. We have had a lot of I seek out, and it's interesting because it comes up a lot in conversation. I seek out films, documentaries, discussions. We just did one on the roof of the Frida with a documentary called Alice Street that discuss themes of gentrification.
Oh, wow.
And it's an interesting conversation to have because an argument could be made that me coming into Santa Ana to open up an art house cinema is an example of gentrification.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it for me is, I don't see it that way at the same time as there is a definition of the word that would absolutely include the Frida cinema as an example of gentrification, and the reason I don't see it that way is because of intent, what my intent is, and, our nonstop work to make sure that the Frida is community-based. And by community-based, I mean the existing community of Santa Ana.
Not bringing in other communities, because that's what follows gentrification.
Cultures and subcultures and subcultures, everyone. And so Do the Right Thing was an early example of that. And I remember when we programmed it and brought him in and me saying, we're going to talk about these things, a little bit of skepticism because we were still kind of the new kids in town. And that was one of our first sort of examples of me showing like, this is a conversation I want to be part of, I mean, in any community I'm in. So he came down and was just so incredibly gracious and led this very intense conversation about examples of gentrification in New York, certainly at the time, but how that conversation continues. There were wonderful Santa Ana locals who, many of whom are friends to this day, that I met that night.
Wow.
Who were there to engage him in these conversations. He brought with him the framed picture of Malcolm X and
I remember that. Yeah.
That he hangs up at the end of the movie. So people were taking photos with that all night. And it was just an incredible experience. We try to have these sorts of opportunities for going beyond the film and having engagement and conversation. Lately, sadly, because of COVID, that's been limited. We did some at the drive-in. we've had a couple of guest speakers at the Frida, but it's a tougher sort of thing to do right now because of this. We did the Science on Screen program through Zoom, so we were able to do those dialogues. But we certainly look forward to like getting more of these going again. But that was just an incredible night. And early, and the art show that we had, because we do a rotating art show in the lobby, and we try to theme it to something we're doing that month cinematically. So in anticipation of that, we threw out an art show called Controversial Cinema that was curated by a local Santa Ana artist, Mike Zabrowski. And so there were pieces, Natural Born Killers, a lot of Do the Right Thing, Lars von Trier, The Last Temptation of Christ. There were just incredible pieces all over the lobby that spoke to films that were controversial upon their release, Taxi Driver. So again, tying in film to other art forms, to conversation, to relative thematic themes of conversation that go beyond, well, when we shot this scene, we used this kind of a lens. I mean, those are good too, but I am looking at the themes of the film, and what does this film tell us about a time when it was made, and about where we are today, is always very interesting to me.
Speaking of COVID, what are some of the precautions that you're taking right now, and what type of future events you're going to have to curate a little differently due to this COVID, because it's been around and it seems like it's going to be around for a lot longer.
Yeah. So upon opening, when we reopened we had a week in April, then we were dark for a week, and then we opened wide like back in May. We had restrictions at the time that we followed from the county level, and then some. So the restrictions were obviously the wiping and all that stuff, and masks indoors and all that, which we did, but we also limited our capacity beyond what was required. We closed a week before we had to back in 2020, because there was so much ambiguity about this thing that was happening, and the numbers were going up, and I'm like, it is not safe for us to be here. We'll figure it out. And so we've always taken it very, very seriously. So when we reopened, it was with restrictions and then a limited capacity of 25% of our theater, which we kept for a while. Then when, there was that miracle month, whatever you want to call it, where the vaccines and everything, and so then we kept our mask policy, must be masked. All of our staff and volunteers are vaccinated. Everyone behind the counter masks 24/7. But recently, what we've done, right now, there are no restrictions in the county, save for the state restriction of having to have masks on indoors, which I don't even know if that's a state restriction anymore, because I've been to some movie theaters where they're just not upholding it. But I don't know if it's because the state loosened up or the theater doesn't, but we've continued to keep that in place.
That's good, actually.
We decided to relimit our capacity. So our capacity right now is at 50%. That is not mandated. That is a self-decision, because what we are not wanting to do yet is go and ask for proof of vaccines and or negative test. The metric that I've been using is the local ICUs. Because my thing is this, it's like you said, it's out there, it's with us. We are masking, we are cleaning, we have, sanitation material all over the theater. We're limited. We're doing above and beyond what we can to make sure people don't get sick. But I am concerned about ICU overload. And I'm happy to talk to people who maybe are thinking, COVID is not a big deal, whatever, to say, hey, look, let's not talk about COVID anymore. Let's say that you had a heart attack right now, completely unrelated to COVID. You may not get an ICU bed because of the COVID overload. That is, this concern is bigger than COVID. And so I've been looking at the ICUs as my metric as to, do we get to a point where it's like, that's it, we're going full vaccine? And fortunately, locally, those numbers have been dropping.
Mhm.
Nationally, not so much, sadly, but locally, we seem to have it in check. So we're not doing the mandatory vaccines. What we are doing is just keeping our theater limited beyond what we, to 50%, and then everything else. The only exception to that is Rocky Horror. With Rocky Horror, because there is an element where we have performers and
Mhm.
they're performing out to the audience,
Mhm.
we decided that we would do mandatory, you must have a vaccine, but you can also bring in proof of a negative test in the last 3 days. Because where I'm at right now is, I have my own, I got vaccinated the day they became available. If I can get a 12th shot now, I would. I'm not there with this thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I respect that some people are apprehensive, and I don't want, however long I can, to discriminate if someone is just not comfortable with the
Yeah.
vaccine. So,
Mhm.
so to those people, we put in writing, you don't have to show us that you're negative, and that will work as well. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mhm.
If you don't want to get a vaccine, don't, show us that you've had a negative. We encourage you to, but we're not going to tell you can't come in, as long as you can show us this is a test from the last 3 days and it's a negative test. That will
Yeah.
suffice. So we're doing that with Rocky Horror. We have not made that a policy for the theater overall yet. And as long as the ICU numbers continue to be in check, we're going to continue as is. As far as when are we going to go over 50%, when are we going to take our
Mhm.
masks down? It's not even a conversation we've even had. It's not,
Yeah.
we're not.
I don't think you actually can,
No.
but I think it's great the precautions that you're taking, because you could easily go past 50%, and then you will feel responsible if there's an outbreak or something like that were to happen. But like you said, the numbers have been going down and people are being more cautious. Now, going back to COVID-19, it really busted so many businesses, especially independent cinema houses. So
Ooh,
how did you survive? How did the Frida keep afloat?
drive-ins. The irony of what the drive-ins did for our organization is, it's one of those things where one almost feels guilty for acknowledging the great fortune that was the drive-ins,
Yeah.
because of just how dark the times were. But essentially, it was becoming very clear that we were going to have to close driving and streaming cinema. I have to acknowledge streaming cinema as well, and all the
Mhm.
wonderful distributors who made that platform available. But I just was immediately like, we need to find another way to keep our mission going. I cannot just close down. It's not an option. The Frida is going to close, but how do we keep our mission going?
Mhm.
And so pretty much immediately, I filed for a PPP, the Payment Protection Plan
Mhm.
program. We got funds to overall, over the last everything, I only had
Mhm.
to furlough my staff for 6 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
That's actually incredible.
we had a 6 day furlough between while I was waiting for the PPP to come through and when it was approved. And then I called everyone, hey, we just got, and so back to work, so 6 days.
Mhm.
And the PPP pays for certain months of work. And so the focus for me was, while these PPP funds are paying their payroll, we are going to create a drive-in program. And so that was a 2-month process. And it was basically from the
Mhm.
moment someone gets in their car to the moment they leave, what are all the different things we have to check off to make sure that they do not have to interact with another human being in a
Wow.
physical way. So it was everything from, the tickets have to have QR codes that could be scanned through the closed window.
Mhm.
The sound has to come in through FM transmission, no speakers, no having to lower the
Mhm.
windows to listen to the movie. Okay, they're going to have to use a restroom. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to clean it this many times. And we're going to have 6 feet separation, but that's it. Bathrooms. And then down the
Wow.
road, okay, people are getting hungry. We
Mhm.
brought in food trucks, but these are the rules. But as far as them getting there, we didn't take cash sales at the door. We didn't
Mhm.
even take credit cards. You had to buy your ticket online and have your QR code ready to scan through the window. FM transmission of the sound. We invested in an FM transmitter.
Mhm.
Then it was a matter of finding spaces that would partner with us to do the drive-ins, and we were very fortunate there. Um, And we ended up doing over 160 drive-ins in 12 months. I mean, it was incredible. And that because then it became, okay, I want the drive-ins to reflect the Frida's mission. So where else can we go with this? So then that became, we partnered with Orange County High School of the Arts, for example, their conservatory program, and ran 19 classes for them at the drive-in. So the students all came out in their cars and they had their workshops and their classes at the drive-in. We did the Rotary Club's annual gala as a drive-in. We partnered with OC Pride on a number of events. We partnered with a church and did their Lenten service as a drive-in. And so we that was great because then we got to be of service to the community, and we didn't have to lose that. And then what is some of the programming that we used to do? We did science on screen. Cool. Dear Science on Screen. Can we do this as a drive-in? Absolutely. Great. We brought Rocky Horror back as a drive-in, but without the cast, obviously. But, so then it became a fun sort of challenge of let's reflect the cinema's regular programming outdoors. So that really carried us. And then we had fundraisers and, wrote grants and relief funds. It was easily my busiest year, but a year of tremendous growth for the organization.
Well, I'm so glad you guys are still, not only afloat, but it seems that you're thriving. We only have a few minutes left, and I want you to be able to talk about what's coming up this weekend. You touched upon it. It's, you're going to be showing Blue Velvet, right? It's the 35th anniversary. So go ahead and let people know what you're going to do this weekend and what precautions, and also where can they get tickets?
Absolutely. Well, tickets for all of our programming can be found at thefridacinema.org, because we are a nonprofit. And there's tabs at the top at the Frida. Will take you to the Frida's programming. We also have drive-in up there, but right now we're in pause for the drive-ins and streaming cinema. So at the Frida. And Blue Velvet, I just this morning wrote a blog about Blue Velvet. So if you're curious to know why, it's right on the top of the blog. But Blue Velvet is my favorite film. It's a film that really sort of marked me and sort of set me on a course. And it is the 35th anniversary of the film, which is insane because I still remember seeing it in the theaters. And we are screening it tomorrow, tomorrow being Friday the 17th at 7:30. In conjunction with an art show, where we curate art show. So it's pieces inspired by Blue Velvet from local artists. We also have screenings Saturday and Sunday of the film, and the art will still be up. We're also opening a new Nicolas Cage film, which title escapes me. I want to say Ghosts of the... it's been a week. Sorry.
No. I get it.
Yeah, so Trevor, our programmer, refers to Nicolas Cage as the patron saint of the Frida, because some of our biggest films, two in particular, Mandy and Pig, have been the Frida's biggest first run art house films. But St. Nick's next film, Prisoners of the Ghostland, opens tomorrow as well for a week. And then October is always horror month. We don't just do horror, but the idea is every single day in October, there'll be a horror film playing in one of our auditoriums, mostly classics, every year, but not just horror for those of you who are not horror fans. For me, I'm a
scaredy cat. I admit it.
That's the best horror audience. Yeah. So everything is on the FridaCinema.org. And also, if you'd like to support us, there is also a donation link as well to the Frida. We do great work and appreciate all the support we get. So the FridaCinema.org.
That's awesome. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. Like you said, you're busy right now, but people, I feel, really would resonate with your story, because who in their right mind would want to just bypass, you know what? I wanted to be a director, producer. Yeah, not like that anymore. But boom, let me see if I could own my own independent cinema house. So kudos to you.
Thank
And,
you.
I hope it not only, again, that you stay afloat, but you continue to thrive. And I'll definitely be going to the cinema pretty soon at the Frida. So thank you so much.
I
And
definitely appreciate it. And please do let me know if you're ever coming down.
oh,
All right.
absolutely. Well,
Take
take
care.
care. Bye bye.
Thanks so much again.
Thank
Bye bye.
you. Bye. Thanks for joining People Junkie. Make sure to check us out on all our social media platforms. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and click that button that lets you know when we're dropping a new podcast. And if you are on the road, on the go, don't worry, we got you. We're also on Spotify and soon Apple Podcasts. And remember, wherever you go or whatever you do, put a smile on your face. You might not know whose day you'll make. Ciao for now.